Well, hello, everybody. This is Doug Reeves, broadcasting from Boston from Creative Leadership Solutions. And today we want to talk about how to use coaching as an effective leadership technique. But just this morning, I was on the phone with a colleague of mine who I have known and coached over many years. But the reminder that I had to offer to him was he does such a great job of taking care of everybody else, and the leaders listening on this program will identify with him. He takes care of everybody else except himself. And this is a large system. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on providing for the education, the support, and the welfare of all of their teachers, all of their principals, all of their emerging leaders, but nothing on the leaders themselves. And my challenge to you today is, if you want to make sure that you take care of everybody else, please don't be embarrassed about taking care of yourself, because that's what effective executive coaching does. In the next few minutes, we'll be talking about the difference between effective executive coaching and coaching that I think, frankly, is not terribly helpful. Let me begin by telling you that we have several upcoming leadership and learning opportunities. We'll have a brand new webinar on responding to the ESSA, that's in America, and I know we have some international guests here, but in the US, that's the Every Student Succeeds Act, and a guide to strategic planning, shared leadership, and student success. I'll be joined by my colleague, Dr. Howie Knopf, on how to make this most effective. September 7th, we'll be talking about school discipline, classroom management, self-management, implementing the substance of ESSA, and again, that's Dr. Howie Knopf. I would just add that in a recent survey of school leaders, when they were asked the number one thing that you wish the people you were interviewing had, but they don't, it's classroom management. Nobody likes to teach it, nobody likes to spend time on it, but Howie's insight into this is incredibly important. Then September 20th, we'll be talking about disobedient, disruptive, defiant, disturbed students, and those are actually the ones that live with you, but we'll actually be talking about those who are in your schools as well. Behavioral interventions for challenging students. And Howie, once again, has some really thoughtful and great ideas. Most importantly, we're really sensitive to the budget and time constraints that you are working under. So part of what my colleagues and I at Creative Leadership Solutions have resolved to do is to no longer ask you to come to Boston or come to San Francisco. They're great places, but let's face it, it's beyond the budget and time constraints that many people have. So what we have decided to do is that we will bring the Great to Greater Institutes, that's our world-class, internationally known presenters who present at Boston and San Francisco Great to Greater Institutes to you. We will come to any region of the country. We'll come to any other nation that happens to be listening in today. We will come to you and save you as a result, literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in flights, in lodging, in expenses, because we will come to you. So if the Great to Greater Institute is something that you wish you would go to, but you know you can only send one or two people to attend, let us come to you, because we want to be respectful of the fact that you've got limited time and resources, and we're trying to get the most out of those. So let's get to work. Throughout today, you can use the chat function or the question function in the webinar. That way I'll see exactly the questions that you raise all the time. But I know that we have a few people who are also listening, not on a computer, but on their phones. So if you're listening on a smartphone or dumb phone or any kind of phone, you can use the following text function, and I'll repeat it slowly, so you can participate just like people who are using their computers. That function is country code 1-781-710-9633, and I want to make sure that you can participate just as much as people who have computers. So if you're calling with just a phone, you can use country code 1-781-710-9633. And finally, I just want to make sure that we really make these webinars a safe place for challenges. Goodness knows I have a point of view, and I try to be pretty upfront about that. but mine is not the only point of view. And so if you have a different point of view, this is a safe place where you can know that your point of view that is different, that is divergent, will be respected and honored. And we all learn, everybody on this webinar, an international audience, will learn from your divergent point of view. So please don't be reluctant to put that forward, and have confidence that I will also relay that in a respectful and positive manner. So, to work. Here are the big ideas. Seems to me that we have lonely jobs as leaders. Oftentimes, some of you as principals or superintendent or other system level leaders are the only one in your community who bears that burden. Therefore, coaching, one-to-one support is a necessity, not a luxury. I think some people think of executive coaching of something that only the Fortune 500 should have. But I would argue that if you're in a rural area of Pennsylvania or Mississippi or Kansas, you need that one-to-one support as much as the Fortune 500 CEO does. And you need it because you are alone and you don't get the opportunity to have exchanges about what you know and what you don't know and what you wish you knew and the personnel problems that you're having. Because if you had that in the grocery store or your church, you'd wind up with a shouting match. So think of coaching as a necessity, not a luxury. You also have the opportunity to have what I would call an audience of one. And the audience of one means that you no longer have to be the biggest ego in the room, but rather can subordinate your ego to really understand what you need to learn and how you can be better. The other observation I would offer to you is that you are also in a position not just to be coached, but to be a coach. And in that role, it seems to me that a lot of leaders spend way too much time on your worst performers. They're the ones who we're observing and coaching and trying to help. We don't spend nearly enough time on our best performers. So if you want to take away a big idea from today, it's not just that you as a leader need coaching, it's that your best performers need to be coaching as well. We spend way too much time and money helping our underperformers when we need to help our top performers. So let's talk about the impact. Two big resources here. Let's start with Gallup. And I want to give you the research bona fides of their research first. We're talking about 13 million administrations, 20 countries. Extraordinary cross-cultural impact here. And the bottom line is the following. People who are coached on their strengths, and let's think about that you may think, oh gee, I always talk about their strengths. Don't believe it. Think about the last performance review you received, and there were 99 things were great, and there were one thing, two things that needed to be improved. What did you focus on? You went immediately to those one or two things that weren't great and perseverated about that. But listen to the research. People coached on strengths, not fixing weaknesses, coached on strengths, were three times more likely to be reporting an excellent quality of life, 6 times more likely to be fully engaged at work. Colleagues, I'm telling you, stop perseverating about weaknesses. Start focusing on strengths. And my colleagues and I at Creative Leadership Solutions really focus on that. And it is a battle because people always want to focus on what their weaknesses are, and we're telling you, focus on strengths. My own work with more than 1,000 educational leaders interestingly showed that when they focus on 2 scales, and we started with 7, but there's just 2 big ones, resilience and renewal. If you focus on resilience and renewal on both our closed-end and open-ended assessments, then you'll have strong relationships to personal and professional satisfaction. That's the work that Dr. Allison and I did, and I want to suggest to you that that is a freely available, great resource that you might want to take into account. So, Harvard Business Review called what we have right now the Wild West of executive coaching. Right now, there are essentially no standards. Anybody can make unsubstantiated claims about coaching. That's why I started with research, because Most people will talk about one-to-one personal journey stories, which candidly is a sample size of one. When I use Gallup research with 13 million and my own research with more than 1,000, I'm going to suggest that's better than the typical anecdotal work that most unsubstantiated claims have. There are frequent misuses of coaching to fix underperforming employees, and that is, right before we fire them, the excuse is, well, we offered them coaching and it didn't work out. Coaching ought to be for your very best people, for you, for your senior leaders. Oftentimes it's unlicensed therapy. That is, people in our world of education have stress and anxiety. That's completely understandable. But if you're not a licensed psychotherapist, please stop doing unlicensed therapy or hiring coaches who have no idea what real therapy is. And most importantly, it is not linked to individual and organizational goals. So let's think about the research on coaching. Most recently, in 2017, a meta-analysis of 37 studies, and thanks to Joellen Killian, who is just continuing to be, thanks to Learning Forward, such a remarkable and terrific researcher and advocate and leader in this area. What her research reviewed was that coaching positively affects teaching practices and student achievement. You don't see this very often with a meta-analysis. You'll see a study here, a study there, but a synthesis of 37 studies is quite conclusive. And she found that both general and content-specific coaching have a positive and significant impact on student achievement. So let us be clear. Coaching is not a feel-good exercise. It is something that improves the impact and effectiveness on the individual leaders, on the leaders that they coach, and most importantly, on the students that they support. Now, let us consider the distinctive role of the coach. I want you to think about for a moment, and I'll wait 30 seconds while I wait for you to use the question function on your webinar. Tell me about your frustrations with people who are managers, mentors, consultants, therapists, and coach. Let's see if we can parse out some of the differences. I'll wait 30 seconds and ask you to respond using the question function on the internet. Okay, so let's review some of your answers. This is very interesting. I'm smiling because I've seen some of these before. You know, when my manager says, "I want to coach you," what it always is about is a criticism. Let's hear some more. I hoped my mentor would help me about the culture, but what the mentor did was to tell me about his, in parenthesis, always his own experiences. That's particularly appropriate now, considering the dominance of males in management and the lack of dominance of females. More about that in a moment. Okay, our consultants always ask advice, they never follow up. Great point, and thanks for that little dart. We in the consulting industry deserve that dart, because too often all we do is drive by. And I am committed. I just before this webinar started sent an email that said we will not do drive-bys. I'm not going to go to Vietnam for one day for a drive-by and not come back 4 times to help implementation. We have to be committed. So a really heart-wrenching comment that you made about therapy, and I'll just end with this. Gosh, you have people who need therapy. They're stressed out, they have personal problems, they have family problems, they have divorce, they have child problems. They need treatment for anxiety and for stress. So all I will tell you is that a coaching client of mine was related to this same issue, and what she did was to get little cards that she provided to people that said, here is our employee assistance program. We believe in you. We believe in your need for support and therapy. Here is the number to call. Because what had happened before is that she had been providing a therapy that she really wasn't qualified to do. And what she needed was the opportunity to refer those people for stress and anxiety disorders to somebody else. Okay, so let's get to the positive stuff, the hallmarks of executive coaching. Our studies of coaching revealed the following: that effective coaching is individualized, sustained, it's content specific. Thanks, Joellen, on that one. And it's focused. So how do we make this happen? How do we make sure that the coaching that you receive and that you give meets these four hallmarks? We learned that there is a internationally validated research base that will reveal the distinctive character of leadership coaching. Gallup is a good start. I think I would like immodestly to say that I've contributed to this, but so has Michael Fullan, John Kotter, Marshall Goldsmith, many others. So this is not just one researcher against another. I'm just one pebble on the mountain of research here that I think helps establish what makes effective leadership coaching happen. It focuses on individual and organizational energy. So we're not just saying what makes you feel better. It's how you help the organization. And my counsel, if you're going to engage in organizational coaching, in effective leadership coaching, is not that you're just having people feel better about themselves. It's how do they help the organization get better, because feeling part, as Daniel Pink has said, feeling part of an important mission that I help to advance is part of what helps me feel better as well. It empowers the leaders to make better decisions, achieve their goals, and lead happier and more balanced lives. And finally, it's designed for leaders at every level. Clearly, I spend a lot of time with superintendents, but I will tell you, with every advancing year, I know that we need to spend time with today's teachers who are going to be tomorrow's teacher leaders, who will be the next day's system leaders, who will be the next day's multi-system leaders. Pay attention to your emerging leaders, because I'm very gravely concerned that we are not identifying and supporting and coaching those people who 5-10 years from now will be the leaders who we desperately need. So let's call out some bad practices. I respect people who are involved in instructional coaching, but I've got to call this out. The voluntary illusion. Well, you'll be coached only if you're invited in. That is such baloney. What that means is that we have people on whom millions of dollars are being spent to be so-called coaches. And then I'll ask them, how much time did you spend in the classroom? Well, not much. I can only go in when I'm invited. Well, how much time with kids? Well, I can't be there. I can only talk to the teacher one-on-one. That is crazy. Coaching has to take place with students, and it has to be part of the process. The idea that evaluation is distinguished from coaching is also crazy, and what it does is to take teachers out of the game. So I want to suggest respectfully that a large part of what people are now calling instructional coaching is worthless. It is worthless if it's not in the classroom with real students, and it's worthless if it's only by invitation. It has to be there as part of how we get better with professionals. I want to ask you, would you be willing to go under the knife of a surgeon who would say, well, I'll only accept coaching when I feel like it? You would want that surgeon to have coaching all the time to get better and better. That's true for teachers, it's true for leaders, it's true for surgeons. For goodness sake, we have to stop this voluntary illusion that has infected coaching processes. So the big ideas are the following. You can have coaching, you can have evaluation. They're typically incompatible. So coaching has got to be a rule that helps people get better, where it's safe to say, I don't know this, I don't know how to get better, and evaluation that is much more rigid, particularly in the wasteful and crazy way that evaluations are done right now. Side note, would you like to have teacher evaluation done in a way that saves you money and time? Have Kim Marshall do it. Stop these stupid and crazy evaluation systems that are done right now and save money and time. At the end of this, email me and I'll tell you how to have Kim Marshall help you do it better. The coaches work for the client. That is, if you're teaching third grade as a leadership team member, if you're a principal, if you're a superintendent, then you are the client, and coaches work and support you. And then the client works for the organization. Whatever your participation level is, you support the entire group. And the coaches focus on the goals and the commitments, both personal and organizational. For example, one of the things that I've tried to help the clients do that I coach is support the organization, but also, oh, gee, you said I've got 3 kids at home, I want to spend more time with them, then let's look at the schedule. You want to support the district's strategic plan? I get that, but you also say, I'm trying to finish my dissertation and be able to be a PhD or an EDD, then let's support that. It's not either or. We've got to do both and. Here are some of the alternatives that I've seen that we face as coaches. On the left-hand side, you see the typical things of policy, growth, self-development, individual change, and service. I support those, but they're not mutually exclusive with the right-hand side. Rather than just focus on policy, let's focus on behavior. For example, do you want to just have a policy about effective teaching and leadership, or do you want to focus on behavior? Behavior in meetings, behavior with students, behavior in terms of grading practices. Growth is good, but can we also focus on what real achievement means in terms of percentage of students meeting or exceeding standards? Self-development is good, but can we also focus on system development? And the real existential challenge here is, what happens when you leave? How will the system continue to be sustainable after you go? Individual change is good. I think that's really important. Take care of yourself and lose weight and stop smoking and all those kind of things. But how do you translate that into organizational change? And finally, delivery of service is important, but delivery of goals achieved is what will sustain this. So it's all these alternatives that we really have to take into account. So let's think about what executive coaching is. The best executive coaching is a precision tool to optimize the abilities of leaders. It pushes clients beyond their comfort zone. And here's the best, if you want one big takeaway from today's webinar, have a rhythm of promises made, promises kept. Promises made, promises kept. Here's what I said I was going to do in the last meeting. Here's what I did. And this may sound simple to you, but let me tell you, the data from more than 1 million leaders gathered by Kouzes and Posner, some of the best leadership researchers out there, is this rhythm of we do what we say we'll do. So last meeting I said I'll do this. Today I'd like to tell you that I did that. Promises made, promises kept. You can do this in professional learning communities, in faculty communities. You can do this in board meetings and community meetings. Promises made, promises kept. One of the best things you can do. So let's talk about personalizing the coaching relationship. This is brand new evidence that I found stunning on organizational drag. It's just a calendar review. Here's my challenge, friends. Go through your last 12 months of meetings. Count them up. How many meetings? How many hours? How many dollars per person did you have? I'd be willing to bet that everybody listening to this webinar, if you really do this seriously, a year's worth of meetings, how many meetings, how many people, how many dollars per person, I'll bet you've spent $100,000. Some of you spent $1 million. In this particular study, $15 million on meetings alone. And it's really hard to say, gosh, if we would have had $100,000, if we would have had $1,000,000, or if we would have had $15 million to spend, is that the way we would have spent it? Probably not. It's organizational drag. It's money and time sucked out of the organization without really understanding where it went. We identify renewal and resilience. Remember the study that Dr. L. Allison and I did that said of all the elements of renewal, these two had the greatest impact on personal and professional satisfaction. Prioritization of values. I'll oftentimes ask people what their values are, and then I compare that to what their resource allocation is. It's a wide divergence. Review the calendar. It's what Buck Rogers used to call calendar integrity. Do I allocate my time, my most precious resources leader, where I think it is most important? And then get down to tasks and projects. Share that with a colleague. You may have this in many, many different places. Get it into one place, list every single task and project, and then say, are they really reflecting my priorities? And the evidence that I've gathered from more than 2,000 schools says that if you've got more than 6 priorities, you've got none. So get them down to your top 6. So I want to conclude with a view of organizational change. And that is to say, what do we know about organizational change, and how will this next year be better for you? Turns out to me that we've had the wrong models, wrong assumptions, wrong tools. There have been some cultural shifts, and we can offer today, I think, a new and better model of educational change. So let's think about why these models fail. The old model is, if you want people to change, they have to change their knowledge, their attitudes, their beliefs. That's why we bring in the inspirational speaker at the beginning of school. Change their knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs, and then they'll change their behavior. And with just enough training, yeah, right, like in 90 minutes, attitudes will change and the right actions will follow. So I just want to ask you, what are the elements of culture that lead to these assumptions? The elements of culture are, everybody will just listen to this, get the message. It's this revival idea that a word will change attitudes, knowledge, and beliefs. And it's just plain wrong, my friends. We're using the wrong tools. We've all been through these. We have the rallies at the beginning of the year, and all it does is lead to cynicism. We have coalitions, and trust me, John Kotter is a thoughtful and a good guy. He's the one who articulated 25, 30 years ago the need for committees and coalitions, and it's been found wanting. Structure and hierarchy. Do it from the top down. Get a few people at the top and make it happen. Rewards and punishment. This is the Skinnerian approach, rats in a maze, rewards and punishment, that we've been trying for 100 years. And it's still out there. It's by every legislator who says that if we just have an extra $500, now think about this, $500 divided by 52 weeks after taxes, so you got about 25 bucks left over for pizza and beer, and then people will say, now I've got it. Now I've got these teaching and leadership strategies that I will bring forward. It's crazy. And in fact, the evidence on rewards and punishment is worse than it doesn't work. It's actually that when you withdraw the rewards and punishment, behavior doesn't go back to where it was before. It actually regresses. Change training. There's a whole industry out there about that. And let me really prod you on this, because I know it's uncomfortable, but you wouldn't be here if you didn't, if you weren't willing to encounter some uncomfortable beliefs and research. Attitude surveys. All that money and time you're spending on climate and culture surveys, they don't work. Let's critically examine each one of these. What's wrong with rallies? Well, in a brand new book, Sloman and Fernbach wrote The Knowledge Illusion, which is we think we know stuff that we actually don't know. We Google stuff, and that gives us an inappropriately high level of confidence in what we know, when in fact we don't know it. The buy-in illusion. Whenever I have a leader say, well, I've got buy-in from my staff, no, they don't. What they've done is to drive the discussion and the debate and the dissent into the parking lot. you don't have buy-in. We suppress the skeptics who could actually be really helpful for us. A skeptic is somebody who wants evidence. And I would suggest inviting the skeptics to the table because they just want the beef. They want the evidence. The cynics, on the other hand, get credibility because they say, well, see, he doesn't want to listen to me, and the cynics don't want to hear anything you have to say. Separate skeptics from cynics. Skeptics want evidence, and we got to provide that evidence. Cynics do not want evidence, and we got to isolate and eliminate them. So think about a change rally experience that you've had. I want to go on to coalitions. Now, I know it sounds great, the guiding coalition. That's the sort of thing that John Kotter has advocated, but a lot of people quote Kotter selectively. So here's my observation. You bring together 30 people in the room, and they all have their different interest groups. I represent the teachers. I represent the parents. I represent the labor unions, and so on. But what they don't do is to identify essential stakeholders. One of the best examples that I heard in just the last few months is a wonderful person who said, in response to the question, who do you represent? And she said, I represent the people who are not here. I represent the future students for the future. And we ought to make sure that we take care of them as well. So let's be fair to John Kotter. John Kotter talked about guiding coalitions 25 years ago. Here's what he says now. In both small and large organizations, a successful guiding team may consist of only 3 to 5 people during the first year of a renewal effort. Organizations that fail, Kotter said, expect the team to be led by an executive from strategic planning instead of a line manager. So leaders, superintendents, deputies, chief academic officers, and principals, I'm telling you, don't delegate this. You want to have a successful change leadership, then use what John Kotter has said today, not 25 years ago. Not this 30-person guiding coalition, but a few people who will drive your change effort led by you. So let's think about guiding coalitions and change efforts and move on to structural hierarchy. So the organizational change that a lot of people will tell you to do is let's make sure that we have a change leader in charge. And what happens is not organizational change, but this weird practice of what the literature calls boss pleasing. They'll make you happy. They'll sound great in meetings. Everything's great. Everything's wonderful. We're so blessed to have you. You've seen that, but that doesn't lead to organizational change. What it leads to is everybody acting as if they've got a vision, but nobody is getting real work done. The penetrating question to ask, therefore, is not what people believe, but what they do. And therefore, although we love to talk about visions and boss pleasing and hierarchy, the real important question is, what are you doing? What's the real work that you're engaged in? And let's move on to rewards and punishment. That is what is at the heart of a lot of change efforts these days. It creates a culture of fear and intimidation. My friend, Dr. Chip Kimball at Singapore American Schools, who is a really thoughtful leader, says that the #1 enemy of innovation is a culture of fear. And if you want to have creativity and innovation, we must drive out fear from the organization because it displaces the kind of motivation, the only motivation that works, intrinsic motivation. And what happens is that if we have this rat in a maze, cheese and shocks, today's reward, the cheese, is tomorrow's entitlement. And so it drives out any kind of intrinsic motivation, the sort of work that I do because I think it's meaningful. So let's really rethink all these competitive rewards that are happening right now. I oppose Teacher of the Year as much as I oppose valedictorian because you can't say collaboration and teamwork is a 21st century skill, and by the way, get out the sharp elbows and make sure you eliminate your closest competition because the last thing you want to do is to have somebody else share that honor with you. So what about change training? Oh, here's a big industry. And credit due to Harvard Business Review Press. After a 4-year study of organizational change, researchers found the greatest obstacle to revitalization is the idea that it comes about through organizational change programs, particularly when a staff group sponsors them. We call this the fallacy of programmatic change. So please be a critical consumer when somebody says we're going to have training on this. The only thing that matters is individual and organizational change based on specific behaviors. Finally, surveys. I'll bet everybody on this call and webinar has spent money and time on doing surveys. Hey, I understand your heart is in the right place, but please listen to Seth Stevens-Davidovitz, his brand new work entitled appropriately, Everybody Lies. And I'll just give you some examples from the Everybody Lies research. He'll ask on a survey, how many of you have library cards? Oh, 70%. You can go to the library and find out that it's 30%. How many of you have registered to vote? Oh, 80%. It's actually about 50%. And the list goes on and on. People lie on surveys. And when you're doing these culture and climate surveys and assuming that that's the truth, then what you do is to over-amplify a few negative voices and you under-amplify the rest of them. It is not an accurate source. And we have to have at least, I'm not saying to stop doing surveys because it makes people feel good, but honestly, you've got to compare the survey responses with other available data. Even when you think things are anonymous, even when you hire these outside survey teams, that is no guarantee of honesty. Surveys are not accurate, and we've got to be more skeptical about that. So these are all the wrong tools: rallies, committees, coalitions, structure, hierarchy, rewards and punishment, change, and attitude surveys. So let's conclude our discussion today with what does work. What does work is the PEAK model, P-E-A-K, standing for passion, empiricism, action, and knowledge. Let's review each of these briefly. When you think about passion, I want to ask you this. What would happen in your school if you had a water crisis, as they had in Flynt, Michigan? My gosh, the kids are drinking lead. They're going to have brain damage. They're going to have lifelong consequences. What would you do? I know. Let's assemble a study committee to think about it, because after all, we really don't want to make decisions too quickly. We want to be really careful about this. I want to make sure that I get every interest group represented. No, you wouldn't. You would stop the lead in the drinking water. You would immediately challenge what was going on right then. A sense of urgency is what's required. If it's a safety and health issue, you would never tolerate it. So the question that I want to ask of you is, are your challenges in literacy, in math, and reducing student failure, are they safety and health issues? I would argue that they are, because every time we improve student achievement, we reduce dropouts, we reduce the kindergarten to prison pipeline, we improve safety and health. Imagine that you are the school leader, the mayor of Flynt, Michigan. There's lead in the drinking water. Would you have a sense of urgency, or would you spend the next 5 years studying about it? I think you'd have a sense of urgency and change right now. Empiricism. Well, empiricism means not studies show, but we wind up doing everything else. It's all about what we do to use our own research. So I'm a big believer in reading other people's research. I certainly do that. But I will have to tell you, one of the big revelations that I've had in the last few months is on, for example, high school grading practices. This district had all the usual suspects. Every big name you can imagine had been given a speech. So they had all these names, one after the other after the other. None of them made a difference. Then they had a high school English teacher say, well, I'm going to try these practices. For example, getting rid of the 0 on a 100-point scale. And let's see what happens. Failures went from 28 to 4. Not perfect, but really, really good. What really caused that high school to change? Not the revolving door of one national speaker after the other, but one local high school teacher who showed her data, shared what she had done, and then, after an experiment, showed what she was able to do. That's what changes systems. So think about the prevailing hypotheses that you've got about homework, teachers, test scores, and grading. All of these are the sort of things that everybody has a hypothesis about, but those hypotheses deserve to be tested. Action. So we had passion, empiricism, now we're to action. And the issue of action is about the myth of buy-in. Behavior turns out to precede belief. I don't ask people for buy-in anymore. I don't ask them to, after a presentation of research, to say, oh, now, Doug, I believe. I ask them to be skeptics. And then they say, I don't believe this, but let me try it. Let me test the hypothesis. And if they don't believe that writing helps student achievement, if they don't believe that eliminating the zeros improves student engagement, I get that. I'm not asking for buy-in. I'm asking them to try it. And then once they try it, once they have the behavior first, then they see the results, and then they see the belief. And I will tell you that when people just have superficial buy-in, they're not asking for change, and the opposition is underground. I want that opposition to be right up front. So we have passion and empiricism. We have action, finally, knowledge. Knowledge that drives change doesn't happen from lectures, happens from experiences. Some of the best literature out there is by Kegan Lahey about immunity to change, understanding what the competing commitments are. I don't think that people who oppose change are bad people. They just have competing commitments. They're searching for something else. And so there are always learning experiences. When everybody on your staff has made some kind of a change and they were able to oppose a competing commitment and embrace something that worked, I'll bet all of you have got people, for example, who were the first generation in their family to go to college. They had to get rid of competing commitments and go to college and succeed. I'll bet you had people who have quit smoking, who have quit drinking. They opposed previous commitments, embraced change. You've got the examples right there on your own faculty. So here's how we get change leadership right, the peak model. Passion, empiricism, action, and knowledge. So we can apply this in very specific ways, and here's in sum how I think we can help. One of the things that I try to do in my own practice, and my colleagues do too, is one-to-one executive coaching. I spend time just with nobody else in the room, completely private, with shadowing these leaders on site, as well as follow-up video and phone conferences, one-to-one support. Senior leaders hardly ever have anybody who will do that with them who is not in an evaluative position, one-to-one coaching. I've also learned that team coaching helps. It's always true that in a presentation, somebody will say, well, gee, Doug, this is great, but what you really need to be doing is talking to my 9th grade math team, my 6th grade history team, talk to the individual team members as a group. And we need system support, that is helping establish coaching throughout the entire organization. And finally, what we call impact insight, that is identifying all the initiatives, instructional and leadership initiatives that you've got, and identifying those that you're spending money and time on, but really are not working, and help you do the most important things. So let me close with the following. We have new webinars coming up, August 23rd, the ESSA Guide to Strategic Planning, September 7th, School Discipline, Classroom Management, Self-Management by Students, September 20th, Disobedient, Disruptive, Defiant, and Disturbed Students. You may, perhaps we'll add one on neighbors and friends there. These are the sort of things that we can bring to you. And most importantly, let us take some of the world-class Greater Institute models. You don't have to come to Boston or San Francisco to get these. We'll take it to you. All you have to do is ask. So thanks very much for your very kind attention today. I'm looking forward to more interaction with you in the future. And make sure that you know that you can contact me directly at Nicholas Reeves at the Twitter, creativeleadership.net. You'll see lots of free articles and videos or you can text individually, as many of you already have. 781, that's the country code 1-781-710-9633. Thanks, and have a great day, everybody.